The shape of wealth inequality. Nobody shows you. It's not a K anymore. You've seen the chart. The K-shaped economy. Top arm flying up to the right, bottom arm sliding down to the floor. It's been the go-to explanation for inequality for years. Every economist, every newsletter, every finance bro on Twitter has used it. There's just one problem. That chart is wrong. Not the conclusion. The rich actually are pulling away. The shape is wrong. And once you see the real shape, you'll never look at a wealth chart the same way again. So today, I pulled the numbers straight from the source, the Federal Reserve's own quarterly wealth tracker, the one that splits the entire country into exactly 4 groups and tells you how much of the pie each one actually owns. No estimates, no vibes, just the data. And here's what nobody puts in the meme. Let's start at the top. The wealthiest 1% of American households. That's roughly 1.3 million households out of about 134 million. Currently hold 31% of all the wealth in the entire country. Not 31% of the gains. 31% of everything. Every stock, every house, every dollar in every account, all added up. Now zoom out slightly to the top 10%. That's about 13 million households. Combined, they hold 67% of the nation's wealth. Read that again. 10% of the country owns 2/3 of everything. So what's left for everyone else? The bottom half of the country, that's 67 million households, the largest single group on this chart, holds 2.5%. Not 2.5% each, 2.5% total, split between 67 million households. And just to make the gap impossible to misread, the average household in America has a net worth of about $1,059,000. The median household, the one actually in the middle, has a net worth of about $192,000. That gap between average and median, more than 5 times, only exists because a small number of households at the very top are dragging the average so far upward that it stops meaning anything for everyone else. This is the part where the K-shaped chart usually gets pulled out. Top line up, bottom line down, done. But that chart implies something untrue, that wealth is split into 2 roughly equal-sized groups moving in opposite directions. It isn't. It's not 2 arms. It's one short, flat line. And then a vertical spike at the very end. Picture a hockey stick lying on a table. For most of its length, it barely rises at all. That's roughly 90% of the country. Flat, slow, barely moving. Then right at the very tip, the blade shoots almost straight up. That's the top 10%, and especially the top 1%, where the line goes nearly vertical. That's the real shape of the American wealth distribution right now. Not a K, a hockey stick, flat for almost everyone. Then a near vertical spike for a small sliver at the very top. And once you see it as a hockey stick instead of a K, the why becomes obvious. A K implies 2 forces pulling in opposite directions. Winners and losers equally weighted. A hockey stick implies something different. Compounding. The blade doesn't spike because the top 10% are doing something different every year. It spikes because the same advantage gets applied over and over, and at a certain point, the curve stops looking linear and starts looking vertical. That's what compounding does to any chart. Flat for a long time, then suddenly not flat at all. So where does the spike actually come from? It comes from what each group owns. The bottom half of the country mostly owns things that don't compound the same way. A car, maybe some furniture, whatever's left in a checking account at the end of the month. The top 10% own something completely different, appreciating assets, stocks, real estate, private business equity, assets that grow whether or not you're awake, whether or not you're working, whether or not you even think about them. And that single difference cascades into every other gap you've heard about. Take housing. The median homeowner in America has roughly $400,000 in net worth. The median renter has about $10,400. That's not a small gap. Homeowners are sitting on roughly 38 times more wealth than renters, mostly because a house is an appreciating asset and rent is just an expense that disappears the moment you pay it. Or take education. Households headed by someone with a bachelor's degree have a median net worth around $416,000. Households without a high school diploma sit around $26,000. That's a 16 times gap. Not because a degree is magic, but because it's correlated with access to the kind of jobs that let you start buying appreciating assets earlier and more consistently. Every one of these gaps, homeowner versus renter, degree versus no degree, is really the same hockey stick showing up at a smaller scale. Small early differences in asset ownership compound into massive differences decades later. The bottom of the stick barely moves. The top of the stick goes vertical. And the only real variable that determines which part of the stick you end up on is how early and how much you start owning assets that actually appreciate, not how hard you work. So here's the uncomfortable part nobody wants to say directly. This isn't really about effort, and it's not really a story about good decisions versus bad ones. It's a story about which side of the curve compounding had time to work on. The bottom 90% isn't flat because people there are doing something wrong. It's flat because most of their wealth lives in things that don't grow. And the top 10% isn't vertical because they're smarter. It's vertical because their wealth lives in things that do. Before we wrap up, I want to know where you think you land on this curve, and more importantly, what you think actually changes the shape. Drop it in the comments, because the conversation underneath this video is usually more interesting than the video itself. Because here's the real takeaway. The K-shaped economy made it feel like there were two Americas pulling apart at an equal pace. That's comforting. In a strange way, it suggests balance, two sides of a fight. But the actual data shows something less balanced and more specific. It's not two arms moving apart. It's one long, flat line for almost everyone, and one small, narrow blade rising almost straight up at the very top. Same country, just not the chart you thought it was.